So I'm going to show you how to make a tool to lift the cab and a rear bed off of any kind of pickup. Now I used to lift cabs and beds off with a massive A-frame, but it was a nightmare. It took two people to lift, to obviously assemble it, and the storage was a nightmare. This should be a fairly small tool. You will need an engine crane for this to work. So obviously one of these will set you back about 100, 150 pound. Second hand one's about 50 quid. So not the end of the world. And then steel, you'll be able to see down here. I've ordered a massive amount of steel simply because I'm going to be building a chassis on this truck with some of this, so you won't need to order so much. I think probably if you budget between 50 and 80 pound, it should get you the kind of adaptation you need to work with an engine crane to lift it. So I'm going to go through the process now. I've shown you like how I make it as I go along, and then hopefully I'll be able to show you it lifting both bed and cab. So first things first, what do we need? Well, we're not going to get very far without steel. So the steel I've ordered is some 50mm by 50mm box section, and that's got a 3mm wall. So you want a 3mm minimum wall. You don't want to go any smaller on that. And then we've also got a length of 40 by 40mm, and that's also 3mm wall. And what that means is the 40 by 40 will slide inside of the 50 by 50, and that will give you the adjustability, which will make more sense later on in this video. Alongside that, you could also have some angle iron, which you can make out of by cutting the box section in half, and you can have two, obviously, bits of angle iron, so you don't necessarily need to buy that. I've just bought it for ease. And then I've got a few tabs, which are basically metal pieces with a hole in. I'm just using them for convenience because I've got them here. However, you could just use some flat steel, which again, by cutting up a bit of the box section or cutting a bit of angle iron if you've gone that way. So that's what you need on the side of steel. Additionally to that, you need a tape measure, and then on top of that, something kind of to draw a straight line on your metal. Measurements. You need two crucial measurements. You need your maximum measurement and your minimum measurement. So the maximum measurement is the biggest part that you're going to be lifting, which in my case is this rear bed. Now, roughly looking at that, it's 70 inches or 177 centimetres, thereabouts. So I need to make sure that the tool extends at least to that, because if it doesn't extend all the way and it's too short, then it's a pointless tool. Then your second measurement that you need is your kind of smallest measurement, because you need to make sure that the tool will fit in and will lift whatever the smallest thing may be. Now, in my case, it's this it's this cab, because obviously they taper in at the top, and as you can see, it's a lot smaller. So measuring across there, I've already done it, it's 140 centimetres. However, I then need to subtract a bit of that, because the way the tool works is the legs will come out to extend. So what I'm going to do is, with it being 140 centimetres, I'm going to use 120 centimetres to make my central piece. So what that will mean is the middle piece is 120 centimetres, and then each side will go out 10 centimetres, and that will give me my 140, which will lift this. And then when I'm doing the rear bed to lift it, I will then extend those arms out even further, which will then take up the 177 centimetres. I can't remember exactly what I said, but it will lift that. So it'll basically work between those two ranges of measurements by just completely extending out to how wide you need it. So you've got your two measurements. The smallest one we'll take out of the 50 by 50mm section. We're going to cut that in a moment. And then the other one, it's going to be two legs. So I'll show you how to do that next. So on your 50 by 50 box, which is a bigger piece, you're going to transfer your measurement over onto that and draw it all the way around. So that's my measurement there. Right, now I've got a cut line. You need to put your correct PPE, which in my case is some swimming goggles and some ear defenders, and then cut your piece. So the piece cut, again, we know it's not going to fit in this section here, which is fine, but what we need to make sure is it's not too wide for this section, which it's not. So the main piece is perfect. On to now cutting the two leg pieces. So with the middle section cut, put that to one side. And you'll remember our smallest measurement out of the two was 140 centimetres. So what we need to do now is go to the smaller bit of metal, which essentially will sit inside of the bigger piece. Need to find 140 on the tape measure, mark it, and again draw all the way around because that's a cut line. What we also need to do is half that 140, so we need to find the centre of that, and again put a mark in. And that will essentially give us two pieces of steel the exact same length. When pushed together are your minimum distance that you want the tool to work, but then with the ability to split because they're cut, extend out. So two cuts now, and then what we'll do is we will clean all of the edges up, deburr them, and then just double check that the measurements are correct. So this is what you should be left with, cleaned up the ends with flat disc, and you've got your two smallers and your one central section. So pass one of those through each side, and then make sure that they're touching together, and that is underneath or at the minimum width that you need. So that is 140, which is perfectly fine. And then what will happen is the tool itself will be able to then extend. So I need to get to 177 centimetres for instance, and just as a rough measurement that's already at 204, so we're well within where we need to be. Now it's more beneficial to have a bigger central section because it will make the whole tool stronger, because obviously you've got the rest of this piece which can potentially be pushing against the steel. So you kind of don't want to do a really small central section. If you can do, you want to kind of do the widest that your measurements will allow. But we need to make some kind of locking mechanism next. So there's two ways of doing it. The way I'm going to hopefully do is I'm going to drill one hole through the outer, and I'm going to weld a nut to it, which will mean I can just screw a bolt into the nut and it will press physically against this bar and it will push it up against the back. By doing that, it will mean I've got 1,000 odd different kind of distances that can happily sit at. However, if it's just a quick thing that you only need to lift one cab or two cabs, then the other way of doing it is to get your measurement, which I know this first one is obviously 140, and just drill a hole all the way through this section and this section out the other side and use a bolt through, a bit like an engine crane, and then you can do another hole when you get to your bigger measurement and the same thing again, so then you just move the bolts and move the arms where they need to be. But because I'm always lifting different size vehicles, it makes more sense for me just to do kind of the push against method. So just use whatever method works for you. I'm going to show you how I do mine. Once that's drilled, we're going to adapt some end plates, which we're going to make in a moment. They can be flexible if you want them to, or you can weld them straight to it. We're just going to weld straight to it, and we're going to make those out of the angle iron. So that's the next thing we need to cut. We need to measure that, and then we need to cut that. So what I appreciate, not everyone has a pillar drill. You can do this obviously with a handheld drill. So the plan is to drill a hole through the first skin of the central section, which is the bigger 50 by 50 box section, and then weld a nut to the outside of that hole, which will mean once you push a bolt through, as you can see on this, it will start coming through, and that bolt will then push against the box section it's inside, and it will lock by the force of obviously pushing that against the thread that's in here. Now I'm just going to use these offcuts to weld on, but obviously there's no reason why a nut won't work. It's just I found some fancy offcuts, I'm going to use those, and that's how I'm going to get mine to do. I've measured in roughly 60. It doesn't need to be exact. The only time it needs to be exact is if you are doing the hole all the way through and you want to make sure that the left pipe and the right pipe are exactly the same, so you can mix and match them. But doesn't necessarily need to be exact. So I've measured in roughly 60 mil, somewhere around there. I'm going to bash a hole through, and then I'm going to do the same on the other end. So yeah, let's mash a hole through this now, and then we can proceed on to the next step. So, need to now make the end sections with the angle iron that we have. Now, there's two reasons for doing this. The first one is if we don't put the angle iron kind of feet or ends on, and we try to lift the cabs are notoriously front end heavy because there's a lot more metal work there. So what happens when the box section lifts up, the front will want to tip, and it will actually slide down to the back and cause all sorts of problems. Now, I've been there, done it before. It's not a pretty sight. So you want to have kind of a box section, angle section here to stop it from sliding, and it also has the added benefit of spreading the load. So the quickest way of measuring is the smallest aperture, which is obviously the top of the door, and you want to make sure you're within the part where it starts to bend off, so you want to be on the completely flat section. So although there's 16 inch there, it starts curving well before there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a section of 13 inch, which will sit perfectly on the flat. And I'm going to do 2 of those, 1 for either side. So I'm going to go and get the angle iron now. I'm going to mark 13 inches, cut there, another 13 inches, cut there, and then I'll have my 2 ends ready to be fabricated onto the sliding arms. So you've got your central section, which is this piece here. You've got your 2 end pieces, and now you've just cut obviously your angle iron. So you can pop those to one side. Also any kind of bushes or kind of nuts or whatever you're going to be welding on those, put those to one side, because all the welding may as well be done in one go. So what we need to do next is get the part of the engine crane which we're going to be mounting to, which is this part, which is the bit that sort of slides in and out and usually has to hook through there like that, and then that's how it kind of lifts your engine. We can get that piece there, and we need to make the piece that will attach this to this central section. Now, these come in all different sizes. So this one's a 60mm one in width, and obviously this is a 50mm tube that we're using, or pipe, not tube or pipe, box section, sorry. So we're going to need to pad it out a little bit. Now, I've got some old offcut steel, which I'm going to use these because that's a perfect hole size for that. However, most of you probably won't have that, so what you can do is with some of your box section, just replicate, make a nice long piece and just bash a little hole through. Now 3mm is fine, perfectly fine. The only reason that's 5mm is just because I've got it left over. So I'm going to use those, but again you could just chop these and you can make these out of this. It's just a case of a long bit of metal with a hole in it. And we also then need to pad it out to meet with whatever size one of these that you've got, because they all do range in different sizes. So the theory is that the bolt would go through here, through this port here, and then out the other side, and these ends would be welded to this box section. But like I say, there's a difference in size, so whatever that may be, I've got some old bits of 5mm that I'm just going to use as packers for when I weld it, and then I can get that all nicely welded up, but obviously sat in that position. But if you haven't got anything like that, what you can do is you can space it with some more of the box section. So you could cut the length of that, whatever that is, weld that on, and then make sure it's all welded round. There's no right or wrong way of doing it, as long as it's welded well and it's welded centrally. Now you want to leave that as a pivot point at the top, quite simply because as your engine crane lifts up, your cab or bed will basically stay as level as it can do. It may get to a certain point where it does kind of touch a bit further down here, but at least it's not trying to kind of angle up everything on an angle and it makes everything unstable. So we're going to pack this out, we're going to find a central section, we're going to pack it out and we're going to weld it up, and then it's a case of just welding everything and we're pretty much done. So what are we left with? Well, got this section here which is just slugged. Doesn't need to be pretty, just needs to work. So I've obviously had to bridge over 2 lots of 5mm, but I'm fairly confident that that's not going anywhere. I'm not going to bother cleaning it up either because it's one of those tools I'm going to use like once in a blue moon, so it can rust. But you could get it clean and powder coated if that's your thing. So you have your middle section. These sections go in as so. And then what you do is you get to whichever width you want. For instance, if this is lifting a cab, and you pop your bolts in, like so. Now I'm just going to do them hand tight. What you kind of want to do is nip them up to the point where you can feel them. So you can feel them hand tight once they get in contact with the steel. It's on the inside. And then just use the spanner and give them a slight quarter turn. But you'll see by just my hands that that's probably enough anyway, but they're not kind of moving anywhere. So yeah, just nip those up. Get your engine crane, shake this section out of your engine crane with your bolt, and then pop this in. Now this may be slightly tight, you may need to bend it out slightly if it's kind of compressed in as you've welded with the heat. But pop that in, pop your bolt all the way through. I'm not got time to do it for the video, but then basically fit that into your engine crane arm, and you'll be able to then lift the bed fairly easily with that section. Now you're going to have to change it around if you're going to lift the cab, because the cab needs pushing up rather than pulling up. So what you want to do is have this section basically completely reversed. So you would have this section in your crane the opposite way around, because obviously it can go in both ways. So this pivot point's at the top, and these end arms will be flipped the other way around. So bear with me, I'll kind of show you roughly how you want it set up. So this will now sit in your engine crane this way around, as so, and then these will go in like this. Again, exactly the same method of tightening them where it needs to be. Obviously, please appreciate I'm not tightening these fully while I'm trying to do the video. And what will happen is as that pivots and lifts up, it will actually push, instead of it pulling up, it's going to be pushing this point here. So as the engine crane lifts, which is probably hard to show on the video, but it kind of will go upwards instead. So I'm going to leave it for today. I'm going to go in, I'm going to get myself a donut, because that's been an hour of work. And within the split second of a video, you are going to see me use this tool lifting the car off this C10. So yeah, see it in action.
1 minute 37 seconds later.
Right, so as you can see, the tool works really well. Now obviously this is in a C10, it is a Ford Model A cab, but no tricks, nothing kind of holding it other than the engine crane itself. So I can move it around the garage wherever I need it to be. The only thing to be aware of is on something like this Model A, for instance, the rear end is going to be heavier, just because, as you can see, the weight, there's more kind of metal work this side, so you just got to kind of get your tool into kind of roughly where the middle area is, and then that means that all the way around it's perfectly fine. For transporting it around your garage, the other thing to bear in mind is you want to keep it as low as possible, really, just to kind of keep the weight down low, so it's more stable. But as you can see, I can lift the cab on my own, and then I'm going to be lifting it over the top of this frame that I've just made. The frame isn't finished, I'm moving house, but yeah, there's no way I'd be able to do any of this without a second pair of hands usually. So For the sake of a few £100, it's well worth making one of these for your engine crane.